Start acting
All right.
crazy on me.
Assalamu alaikum. I went ahead and clicked the live button, Imam.
Okay, okay. Wa alaikum salam rahmatullah.
I apologize to the audience for the delay. Imam Khalid was helping me with some technical difficulties I was having.
Right, right. We know how true that is. Right.
No, but alhamdulillah. No, the thing about it is that the I adjusted it a little bit, so now it looks like we're a little bit, closer, taking up more of the screen here. So
Okay, okay,
it can be, the conversations can come into your living room or wherever you're watching this. So
okay.
we can go ahead and get right into it. I wanted to ask you, Imam Khalid, because this was a couple. There were a couple of discussions that I was having with some people, and so it reminded me of this. When you embraced Islam, um,
Mm-hmm.
were there varieties of Islam available in the community? Because I think one thing that's a little unclear to a lot of people is that within the African American community, when you saw the rise of Islam in the community in like the 1960s and 70s, a lot of times it was there were some variations or some deviations, you can say, as well. So when you embraced Islam in 1972, because this podcast is really focusing on your generation and kind of the experiences that you all felt, uh, what was the kind of the landscape of the African American Muslim community from a uh, theological and ideological perspective?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There were number of options with groups who were identifying themselves as Muslims. Uh, but it was something about many of those groups that just did not appeal to me. It just, some of their theology and just didn't make sense. And you had groups at that time, I guess most notably in the early 70s and late 60s, the Nation of Islam. And the Nation of Islam, although it was a heterodox group as it relates to Islam, it was an organization that violated the most fundamental creed of Islam, that there's no God, nothing worthy of worship and deserving of worship other than the one God, Allah, and that the Prophet Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, was the Khatam Nabiyin. He's the seal of all of the prophets. And so the nation violated this grossly. But by the same token, they were a very significant player during the 1960s and early 1970s, particularly the late 1960s, when Malcolm was still alive, because at that particular time, the civil rights movement, which evolved into the Black freedom struggle or Black power movement, if we want to call it that, uh, the Nation of Islam kind of uh, set a standard for what was possible as an alternative to just integration into the existing social system in the United States. They were a separatist organization, and the separatist nature of their work influenced a number of different organizations, and I would dare say even the Black Panther Party for self-defense that was started in Oakland in October 1966. I think they drew heavily from the 10-point program of the Nation of Islam and just gave it a kind of secular twist. So the nation had influence as an alternative to existing civil rights movements and those who were had accepted nonviolence as a philosophy. So the nation had a presence. And even though it was, in my humble opinion, it was misrepresenting Islam, it did have value to the African American community to a certain degree. Also, you had in Washington, D.C., you had a temple for the Moorish Science Temple. Noble Drew Ali. Timothy Drew established this organization. Actually, I think it was from Wilmington, North Carolina. He established this organization before the Nation of Islam was established, and many of the um, of the ideological bent of and political bent of the nation kind of mimic in a way the teachings of Noble Drew Ali and the Moorish Science Temple of America. This was also a group that was based on the elevation of its leader, Timothy Drew, to be called Noble Drew Ali, elevating him beyond just a regular the human status. He had a divine status. Uh, Also, during this particular time, you had, and that also was a heterodox organization that attempted to link its existence to the Moors of, they identified as the Moors of Morocco and put Morocco and Moroccan citizenship at the center of part of their political identification. Let me see who else was out there.
The
And then you had,
Ahmadiyya.
yeah, absolutely. The Ahmadiyya was out there. In Washington, D.C., the Ahmadiyyas did not have a prominent role in the landscape at that particular time. There was a group of Ahmadiyyas there in DC, but as I said, their role was not prominent, not like it had been and was in cities like New York, where the Ahmadiyya movement, starting back in the 1930s, was very much a group that reached out to the African American community, and many of the early Muslims during this period were members of the Ahmadiyya movement. They were the ones who were going into the community. There was a presence at this time of a number of Sunni Muslims, Orthodox Muslims, but they were kind of keeping their presence, and especially the dawah, calling people to Islam. They were kind of keeping it to themselves, trying to, in my estimation, they were basically trying to fly under the radar. In DC, you had another interesting phenomenon, the Black Man's Development Center. And he started out, when I first became Muslim, he was identified as um, Colonel Hassan. Uh, but at the end of his tenure, now he was General Hassan at the Black Man's Development Center. And they did some positive things in the African American community as well. All of these groups had some offering, beneficial offering to the community, but most of, if not all of these groups, distorted the Aqidah, just the basic beliefs of Islam, in a very prominent kind of way.
So in like you mentioned a number of these groups, and then you also mentioned your um not I shouldn't say your reservation with them, but the problem with these groups, and that was distorting the uh, the our recognition of Allah or the recognition of the final prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or in some of those cases both of them. So it's interesting you mentioned Elijah Muhammad from the Nation of Islam, and Noble Drew Ali from the Moorish Science Temple, and the Ahmadiyya movement, based on Ghulam Mirza Ahmed. So, in all of these, did you ever have conversations with these groups where they tried to, I don't know, I don't want to say justify or maybe downplay that, or was there an actual like open recognition that no, this guy is a prophet, or this guy is a messenger, or like were they trying to distort it when they were talking to you to kind of appease your commitment to the finality of prophethood?
Yeah, I think it kind of dependent on the individual that I was talking to or who they were presenting to. Many of the brothers in the nation were very uncompromising in what they were saying about Allah coming in the person of Master Fard Muhammad, Master Fard, and that Elijah Muhammad was the messenger to the black people here in America. And it wasn't like he was the a kind of messenger in the generic sense, but no, he was a prophetic messenger, and his prophethood was to Black people in this country. So, in a way, it definitely, especially after Malcolm X joined the Nation of Islam and got out of prison in 1952, that Malcolm was the one in a traveling with other brothers, of course. But everything that I know about that period and have been told by individuals who were involved, that it was Malcolm who built the nation from a very small, esoteric kind of group to establishing temples up and down the East Coast and the Midwest and in California, all over the country. It was after he was elevated to the position of the national spokesperson. But even before that, he was very much promoting the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. And this had a tremendous impact and effect in the African American community. I think the numbers were exaggerated. And it's very hard to have accurate figures about the membership in the Nation of Islam at that particular period. But I do believe that the numbers were highly exaggerated. And I think the press uh, played in and bought into some of the exaggerated numbers that Malcolm would give or other members of the nation would give, but particularly Malcolm in talking to the press about how many people were members of the organization. At that particular time, it seems that the Nation of Islam was the most impactful of these groups that I've mentioned in the African American community.
One of the things that one of my like I don't know why, but I find it very very interesting is looking into and studying some of these cults, some of these religious cults, like
Right.
the old Jonestown, People's Temple of Jonestown, or what happened
Hmm.
in Waco back in the 90s, and all these different cults. I've noticed
Hmm.
one of the commonalities here is that these cult leaders, they never start off as, or they don't always start off as a prophet. They don't
Hmm.
always start off as a messenger or someone. They just start off as someone who's preaching, the word of God. And then when they get control over their people, that's when they elevate themselves to prophethood. And
Hmm.
that puts their actions beyond question, because you can't question the messenger of God. And I think did you, I don't know if this happened in front of you, but was, like, for example, the Nation of Islam, was Elijah Muhammad always considered to be a prophet, or did something change that kind of prompted him to elevate himself to that level? I'm just curious regarding, like, the theological history
Yeah.
of this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Historically, it was the mysterious disappearance of Fard Muhammad. Everything that I've found in my research and talking with brothers from that, older brothers, they all said that when Fard Muhammad was around, Elijah was just one of his lieutenants. That nobody called him a prophet or messenger or anything like that. And when Fard kind of disappeared in 1934, it was only then that Elijah said, well, you know that man who was teaching us Islam? And they said, yeah. And he said, well, that was Allah in the person, in the body of Master Fard Muhammad. And Master Fard, who was Allah, Allah commissioned me to be his prophet. So it was only after Fard, for the from the existence of the nation, 1930 up until 1934, when Fard was on the set, Elijah was just a regular guy, and he was one of the maybe three or four top lieutenants for Fard. But after Fard left, it became a different story.
And did you ever? I'm sure you had, because when you embraced Islam, you were 20. You were in your 20s, right?
21.
21. So a young 21-year-old. I believe you. We have that picture of you that serves as the flyer for this. That
Right.
21-year-old didn't look like he was one to hide from a debate, or even, potentially even more than that. Can you tell us about any of your um, confrontations or debates on, when engaging with one of these groups on this particular topic?
I in 1975, and I was personally not involved in the group in this confrontation, but in 1975, 12 members of the Islamic Party went to Newark, New Jersey, to distribute our calling card paper, Al Islam, the Islamic Movement Journal. And it was, in hindsight, it was a very short sighted and maybe even foolish move on our part to go into the heart of the strong arm element of the Nation of Islam on the East Coast and say anything detrimental in the paper or our very existence, because we were criticizing Elijah all the time. But in our paper, the big bold headline that the brothers were selling in the streets of downtown Newark was Black Muslims still non believers. And this was after Imam W.D. Muhammad was the head of the organization at this particular point. But at that particular time, and a number of brothers and sisters don't want to accept this, but we were on top of what was going on, especially ideologically. And at this particular time, Imam Muhammad was saying some things that were, as we understood it, outside the bounds of Islam. Like he was promoting that he had a divine mind, and a number of different concepts and ideas that just, in our estimation, and in my estimation, had no place in the arena with the philosophy and ideology of Islam. And so our big headline was Black Muslims still unbelievers. And, the brothers were going downtown, they were selling papers the way that the traveling units would do. And it was a time for Salatul Dhuhr in the middle of the day. So they went up this hill where a new building was being constructed and started making salat. And while they were making salah, uh, about, I'm not sure the numbers. There were 12 Islamic Party members, but the number of Nation of Islam outnumbered that 12. I'm not sure how many Nation guys, but they pulled up in three or four or five different cars and went up the hill while the brothers were praying and started beating the brothers. And they went up and said, who's in charge? Who's in charge? And um, beating them with chains, crowbars. The brothers said they had pistols, and three of the brothers were put into the hospital. It was a very violent confrontation where the nation just attacked the brothers because of our short-sightedness and going into that particular city and being kind of blissfully oblivious to the danger and the harm that was going to bring upon the members of the Islamic Party. So three of the brothers were actually put into the hospital, were hospitalized as a result of this beating. In D.C. itself, we never had any physical confrontation with the Nation of Islam and the Islamic Party, but it was a very tense relationship or non-relationship. It was a very tense environment with the nation and Islamic Party because we were very much vocal in our words and our dawah to people, as well as in our publications, brochures, and Al Islam. We were very vocal about how the philosophy, the theology of the nation did not represent Islam as practiced throughout the Muslim world and in these Muslim majority countries. So it was a very tense period during that time. And one thing I reflect back on, dawah, talk calling people to Islam, particularly in the African American community at that time, was you could not get out of a conversation of inviting an African American to Islam without being asked, "Are you a member of the Nation of Islam? Are you a Black Muslim?" And that distinction for us, those of us who were African American, it was part of, you could expect that question to come. And so it was the nation was kind of looming, not just over, its presence kind of loomed over the Muslim, the Sunni Muslim community across the country at this particular time. This is what the people were familiar with. They had been in existence since the 1930s. So they had a very long head start when it comes to populating these cities with their temples. And this is what everybody, not everybody, but folks in the African American community, we found ourselves going through a continuous process of specifying that we are not them. And let me tell you what true Islam is all about. At that particular time, Sunni Muslims were referred to as Orthodox Muslims. We refer to ourselves as Orthodox Muslims versus the what we characterize as the deviant um, ideology of the Nation of Islam.
So I want, on that note, I wanted to share a couple things with you. You haven't seen this. This is gonna be the first time.
Okay.
And I'm mixing things up a little bit. I found a there's a couple verses from the Quran, a couple ayats from the Quran, and I'm gonna show them to you. You're gonna see them, and I haven't disclosed these to you before, but you're familiar with them, of course. you've been
Okay.
you've been reading the Quran longer than I've been alive. So, but
Mhm.
what I want you to do is, if you can, try to visualize or think back to when you first saw this ayah and what it meant to you at that phase in your Islamic development, and maybe what significance it holds today. Maybe it's let's see. Here we go. And the text may be a little bit small. If you want, I can read it to you. This first one is the first part is وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. And that is, remember, and this is the clear Quran translation. Remember when your Lord said to the angels, "I'm going to place a successive human authority on earth." But I believe some of the older translations use the word "my vicegerent on earth." Can you tell us about the first time you came across this ayah and what it meant to you at that point in your Islamic development and the significance it holds for you today?
Uh, as well as most of the Quran itself, my understanding, I'm not saying it was spoon fed, but we develop an understanding about particular ayahs like this from the classes and lessons with the Islamic Party in North America, because we looked at ourselves as part of the global Islamic movement. We were just the North American branch of the Islamic movement. We looked at these kinds of ayahs as a reinforcement as to why we exist as an organization, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, he's like telling us that he has given authority to humans on earth. And when you read other ayahs in Quran, we realize that that authority is not, um, you know, the authority comes to people who are, uh, well, let me put it like this. that the authority uh, is given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to folks who reject him as well as to those who um, who submit to him. And you know, as the ayah goes on and talking about the angel's response, it's like not being smart mouth with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they want to know. I mean, we don't have we don't have free will. All we can do is serve you and follow your commands. So are you going to put somebody down here who's just going to make a mess, like the mess we have with the degradation of the planet itself? I mean, it's some scary stuff going on just simply because human beings, as human beings, we are not following the guidance that Allah has given us in the Quran. So the angels knew that you give these humans, these new creatures, a free will, they are going to mess it up. They're going to shed blood. They're going to spread corruption. They're going to do all of these horrible and terrible things. Um, and so, in the Islamic Party, this is not an ayah that we were charged with learning the ayah, but in our discussions, our ideological training, this was definitely an ayah that um, you know, we discuss and recognize and realize that as even as Muslims, that it's not just enough to say that we are Muslims. We have to do what Allah commands, and that would identify and distinguish us from other Muslims. Yeah.
Okay, let's go for this next one.
Mm-hmm.
This one is إنما المؤمنون الذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله ثم لم يرتابوا وجاهدوا بأموالهم وأنفسهم في سبيل الله أولئك هم الصادقون. I'll let you say the translation from your memory.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The believers are those who believe in Allah and His Messenger, never since doubted, and will. Oh man, memory's getting foggy here. Because
Well,
what
the
I'm trying to,
translation's different.
yeah, yeah. The translation is strive to the best of their ability in the cause of Allah. They are the sincere ones. Is how we translated that, as opposed to ones true in faith, which is the same thing, but the sincere ones. This was ayah was used kind of as a mantra for members of the Islamic Party because we had the mindset that we didn't want to just have the name and carry the name of Muslims, that we wanted to reach that level, this highest level of iman and becoming Muslim. You know, we didn't want to just be on the entry level of Islam as Muslims. Just say Shahada and fast and do the pillars, and you're entered into the world of Islam. And you just enter just by saying Shahada sincerely. So we didn't want, and we didn't look at ourselves as aspiring just to be called a Muslim. And we didn't look at ourselves even as aspiring just to be mu'minun and mu'minin. We wanted to get that highest level. We wanted to be Muslim. We wanted to achieve the highest level of iman that human beings could achieve. And towards that end, we did a number of things. First and foremost, trying to understand with the books and information that was available to us at that particular time. We did everything we could to try to understand the Quran first and foremost, and then from an understanding of the Quran, that we would uh, try to bring actualize what it is that the Quran is calling upon us to do. So this was one of those ayahs that you know, only those believers who believe in Allah's messenger never since doubted. I mean, that was just a mantra kind of ayah for us. It was something that we wanted to be those sincere ones. That's who we really, really aspired to be.
So you've talked about your the kind of the rigorous work schedule that you all had with respect to the actual street dawah and some of the community engagements you had. But I understand that in the Islamic Party, you all were also tasked with um, some serious Quran study, right? Ideological training. Was that on a daily basis?
It was 6 days a week at Salatul Fajr that we
Oh
studied
boy.
Quran. Yeah, 6 days a
What
week. Sunday was the only day that we didn't collectively come together for Quranic studies.
So if someone who used to be a Christian became a Muslim and joined the Islamic Party, they had to like completely inverse their life. Now
Right.
I gotta go.
Yeah, it's a total flip. Yeah, total lifestyle change. And you know, there were a number of brothers and sisters who affiliated with the Islamic Party over the years in the various cities where we were located, but not everyone who was around, maybe for years, was actually considered a member of the party. We encourage all of the brothers, no matter what their level of commitment, their degree of commitment to doing Islamic work, we wanted to incorporate them in the larger scope of the work that we were doing. So everybody had an opportunity to do something, but there were certain specific functions like going on the street, giving dawah or giving lectures about Islam. And these aspects of dawah were limited to those who had made the ideological and the physical commitment to the organization itself. And so it was very rigorous, intensive ideological training. Some of the other Muslim members in other Muslim masjids and organizations at that time used to characterize us as just being a bunch of intellectuals that all they do is just study. They don't do nothing. I mean, all they're doing is just reading all these books and talking about these books. And, it was kind of denigrating, putting down, folks who were really trying hard to understand what Islam was all about. And it wasn't going to come through osmosis or just going to sleep at night and it's going to come to you like revelation or something the next day. So, but we felt, and I think our work demonstrated that it was much more than just a bunch of people sitting around reading books and studying. After as we were developing what we felt was a decent understanding about what Allah is calling upon us to do as Muslims, we put it into action. The Islamic Party was, if nothing else, it was an action organization. We had a number of different areas in which we interacted with other Muslims, but also with the non-Muslim community. So we felt we weren't just, eggheads, just trying to sit around and read all the time. That reading and study was a prerequisite for doing the kind of work that we felt needed to be done.
Well, I think that that's something that even we as a community, now that the number of Muslims is much larger, I think that's something that still seems to be uh, a problem with. I'm not saying that those accusations against you all was accurate, but that does describe some Muslims where it's a lot more reading and a lot
Mhm.
more focused on the education rather than the action. But you mentioned that all the ideological training took place after Salatul Fajr. So I would assume that the rationale behind it, one is obviously the blessings of that time of day, but also because that's not the best time to be out on the streets giving dawah, right? When everyone is asleep or
Yeah.
in rush hour.
Right, right. Yeah, there were only certain groups of people who would be out in the street all night, and they were in some of the red light districts and where drugs were
Yeah.
being sold on the streets. So they were not our target folks. I mean, it's not that we wouldn't give dower to people who were involved in that kind of stuff, but we didn't target them at while they were doing this. That this was the best time to roll up on them. Now, the other thing about it is that Quranic studies, as I said, was 6 days a week after Fajr, but the organization was divided into families, and each family had a family head, and that family head was responsible for the ideological training of the members in his family. Um, at one point, I was a family head, and so we had to try to develop as much of an in-depth understanding as we possibly could. We were studying primarily the works of Maulana Maududi. We were studying the works of Hassan al-Banna, Said Qutb, in particular. And there were a number of kind of small booklets or their writings that had been translated into English. Um, and so we were very much studying that material and trying to get an understanding of the global Islamic movement so that we can uh, glean from this movement those things that were relevant, the Quran, Sunnah, all that. I'm not talking about those kind of things, but tactical, programmatic, and those kinds of things. Um, we got ideas from wherever we could get it, and we chose to get those kind of ideas and guidance from existing global Islamic movements.
Speaking on that note, uh, there is a picture that I have of
Uh-oh.
somebody. I'm not 100% sure if you've met him. I believe you might have, but I'm certain that you've uh, you have an understanding of who he is and have some sort of a relationship with him. I'm sure. So I'll show you the picture and then you tell us if you ever met him, how that meeting went, and perhaps what influence he had on you and your organizational efforts. Oh, hold on. Yeah, right there. Hold on. There we go. It's
Okay, Yusuf Karadari.
Yeah, but it keeps on moving around, so it's
Jumping,
ruining my
jumping.
surprise.
Right, right, right.
Okay, let's see if it just stays right there. Okay,
Okay. Yeah,
Yusuf Al
you know,
Qaradawi.
sh- yeah, Sheikh Yusuf Al Qadari was just an amazing figure, um, and as a member of the and like a Marabi for the Ikhwan Muslimin. Um, he passed recently. I can't remember the exact year. It's like within the last, maybe last year or a year before. It
Yeah,
was recently,
very
and
recent.
yeah, and Sheikh Karadari. Uh, I never met him, but I tried to read every book that I could get my hand on that he had written. I mean, even to this day, um, I just love his balanced approach to implementing the guidance of Islam into the societies in which we live. Uh, and so he was someone that at an advanced age, he was still turned to. I think he was maybe 96 years old when Allah took his soul, and he was still writing. He was still inspiring. He was still a figure, a venerated figure in the Muslim world. Um, I mean, one particular work. I mean, there's so many that come to mind, but one that I really enjoyed reading because uh, in reading him, he would always come with some perspectives that were not just commonly passed around. And one of those books was Priorities of the Islamic Movement, maybe in the coming phase, in the coming phase.
Yeah,
And this was a very interesting book. because, as I said, Sheikh Karadari would uh, put forth ideas that you may not commonly have in your discussions. And,
Yeah.
I really was impressed. And not only was he the Sheikh and Marabi for just members of the Ikhwan, he was widely recognized throughout the Muslim world as one of the foremost um, workers and scholars of Islam. Of course, there are many people who may have disagreed with him, but I think this is more from an ideological perspective, may not have agreed with his being a member of Ikhwan and what that stood for and this kind of thing. But he's a tremendous figure. It was a tremendous blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given to the Ummah to have people like that, um, in our midst during these very trying times.
Did he have a direct relationship with the Islamic Party to any
Not to my
degree?
not, Yeah, not to my knowledge. It was only through his writings. Um, only Allah knows who the Amir of Islamic Party, Yusuf Muzaffar Hamid, who he may have met over the years, because he spent time in Egypt as well, hanging out with members of the Ikhwan. And Muzaffar was, you know, was blessed to be influenced, directly influenced by figures like Sheikh Karadari. So, but I can't say in particular, but we just studied his materials.
Because I understand that there was a time period in which you were working on the road, uh, and traveling to different places, and you've mentioned before as well that sometimes you'd miss out on some of the fun going on back in DC. But when I was talking to your close friend and comrade, brother Mustafa, he said, I believe he said that one day Sheikh Yusuf was in DC and he was in a hurry, but he stopped by the office. I didn't hear the whole story, but I
Wow.
think but I'm not entirely certain to
Hmm.
what degree what was even discussed there, but
Right, right, right. Yeah. I mean, that was the advantage of Brother Mustafa White being the treasurer and being doing his work inside the building, and us foot soldiers, street people, out there in the street all the time. And I'm saying that in jest, because I love Brother Mustafa. But yeah, I mean, that's probably something I've actually forgot. Just um, get to a certain point and you realize that certain things are not as clear. Historical things sometimes are not as clear as they used to be. But personally, I don't remember his coming to the office. So I'm glad to know that. I'll talk to Mustafa about that some
yeah,
more to find out what was
because
going on with that.
we'll bring him on and we'll get to the bottom of this because there was another opportunity that I think some of the DC brothers were blessed with, but you said that at that time you were doing union work in Alabama or something like that. So,
Right,
but
right.
inshallah, that I mean that's the nature of the Jama'ah where some people have to stick around the headquarters and man things there, and some people have to go into the field. But inshallah, in Jannah you can meet all the people that you didn't get to meet.
That the miss.
Inshallah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so many figures from the Islamic movement, global Islamic movement, came through the headquarters of Islamic Party there in DC. I've mentioned this to you one time before, that the brother, and I can never remember his name, but he was the first elected member to Pakistani parliament. He was a member of Jamaat Islami, visited the headquarters of Islamic Party. And at that particular time, I was directing what we call the Community Mosque Southeast Center, which was located on, I guess it was out at Anacostia, right in the heart of the, hood area. in out there in Southeast. It wasn't in the most violent area, but it was in the hood in Southeast. And he visited that this brother, this parliamentarian, visited the Southeast Center. And when I told him the different things that we were doing, the kind of community programs that we had organized, odd job employment programs for kids in the neighborhood, and just a number of different things, he told me, and I'm not just saying this because I was over there working over there, but he told me that that was some of the most important work outside of just pure dawah to the people that we could do, and that is helping to deliver services and meeting the needs of the people. And sure enough, that to me was a truism then, and it's I'm not going to say it's even more so, but it's just as true today as it was back when this brother who was with under the leadership of Maulana Maududi, and I felt and we felt that this was an important um, acknowledgement on his part that the work that we were doing, and it was kind of like, oh, I'm surprised y'all doing this kind of attitude, that it was kind of underscoring, from somebody who was a part of the global Islamic movement, that yeah, y'all, you know, black folks there in DC, doing something that can make a difference.
Yeah, I think we've had this discussion before about um, the softening of the heart, and but these are the areas that Allah has instructed us to work towards and give our money towards. And even in the Quran, even our zakah is supposed to, one of the categories of zakah is towards the softening of the heart.
Yep.
And yeah, I think that's one of the areas that we as a Muslim community, it's funny because the things that you're talking about implementing in 1975 or whatever, or like around that time period, 50 years ago, those are still like, when we look at certain communities that are impoverished and going through a lot of difficulty, when we as Muslims go in there with our dawah. I mean, one of our, your friend, my elder, and one of my mentors, Imam Qasim in Houston, who has a masjid and who is the imam in the fifth ward. I remember one day there was a brother who really wanted to go do street dawah, and he kept on pestering and pestering. And he said, Imam, why are we distributing meals and groceries? We should be doing street dawah. And he turned around and he didn't yell, but he said very emphatically, he said, the people don't want to hear about Tawheed. All they want is a meal. And after we've given them their meal, then they will come and ask us about Islam. We won't even have to. So,
Right.
I mean, do you think that, and we can make this kind of the last discussion point, do you think that that means that that indicates that 50 years later, we're still talking about employment programs for young people and for people who don't have jobs, and, you know, giving out meals and stuff like that? And that's what you all were doing 50 years ago. Do you think that that means we haven't made a lot of progress as a movement in this country? Or does that just speak to the uh, inequitable nature of the society where we live?
Good question. I think that we cannot say that we haven't made progress. I think we've made tremendous progress in the um, numerically. I mean, there's so many more Muslims today than there were back during that time in this country. Um, in structures and buildings, we've made tremendous progress in building multi-million dollar structures with beautiful, ambiance, and just everything is just wonderful about it. We've made progress in developing full-time Muslim schools, especially from kindergarten to eighth grade, and now many areas now have from kindergarten through 12th. And in those particular areas, I think that we've made tremendous progress. But when you go back to just the ideological piece, I think that we're still lagging behind in that area. Because we have many, many more Muslims. We have many more uh, beautiful places to pray in and work in. But in my humble opinion, our impact in the larger uh, non-Muslim majority, overwhelming majority community is not too much greater than it was as I see it. I mean, proportionally, when you take in effect the numbers of people, just by proportion, uh, it's to me it's about the same level. I mean, if you could subjectively kind of gauge what impact are you having on the society, and because of what your presence, people are coming to Islam. Um, we've made some great strides, but in my humble opinion, we have not, um, maximized our resources, our people, and our energy, and this kind of thing. And if you allow, I want to make a quick point, and I probably shouldn't say this. Well, let me say two quick things. One is that one of the reasons for the existence of the Muslim Alliance and Black Alliance, MABEL, is to try to uh, bring Islam uh, into inner city, predominantly African American and Latino communities as a resource to the community, not just like we are missionaries going into the jungle somewhere and talking to the natives, but actually having a presence in these communities, uh, and with the intention and with the prayer that it helps to re-energize the Islamic work and the Islamic surge that we once had in these particular communities. I think that part of the reason is not that people have lost interest. We have not uh, maximized our capacity. As the Prophet Muhammad SAW has made it clear, who's the most best amongst you? And in one of those responses to that question, he said, the one who's most beneficial to the people. Who is most beneficial? And I don't think that we have maximized this. And now I'm going to say something, and maybe we can continue on this a little bit next week. But another observation that I've made is that part of the reason, perhaps, and Allah knows best, and I'm not saying this from a racialist standpoint, but just from an observation, that part of the reason that we have not maximized our capacity to the degree that we possibly can is that many of these communities are populated by people of darker color than the majority of the Muslims who are citizens are here in the United States right now. And uh, it's sad to me, and I haven't been able to wrap my head around it, but I've been told by a number of friends of mine who are not African American, and they have explained to me and shared the opinion that part of the reason that the African American community in particular is dealt with in the way that is dealt with is that many of our brothers have ingested and in their minds and now spit out that these descendants of former slaves are incapable of organizing. They're incapable of moving the Islamic movement forward, or moving Islam forward in this country. So now that we're here, we're the saviors for Islam in this part of the world. And it's a kind of convoluted way of thinking, in my opinion. I mean, if any of us were to go to any of these Muslim majority countries, it would not be the expectation that our presence would result in setting the direction and the tone and all these other kinds of things. So, what Mabel is all about is trying to leverage this diversity that we have in the Ummah in this part of the world here in the United States, and not have everyone play the same role in this Ummah, but we use our resources and our talents and our intellect to go into communities and to do work that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and looking at his dawah, he didn't discriminate, with people who were enslaved and young people and this kind of thing. These were the ones who were responding to the message, and I just don't think we've maximized that. We have mass, you know, language, all kinds of Islamic skills, but relative to the work that we're doing, I honestly don't see a tremendous amount of difference in what was happening then and what's happening now.
Well, I think based on your response, and obviously I agree with it. Who am I to disagree with that assessment? I felt like it was very fair. Actually, I felt like you were a little bit more generous than you should have been, but okay, you know.
Right, right.
But I think we can go ahead and close this out, and I'd love to continue this discussion next time. But
Sure.
I think just one note that I wanted to mention last time you talked about in your journey to Islam, you navigated
Hmm.
various ideologies, and one of them was Marxism. And one of your friends who we need to have on here as well, former Black Panther, Black Liberation Army member who became Muslim. I remember one thought that he shared with me was that when I asked him why Islam over the other ways of life, he said that all the things that he thought he believed in that were validated through Marxism, he said he found it much more perfectly and divinely described in Islam. And of the
Right,
many things, one of the things that he said was that Islam was the Islam was the solution for the proletariat. Islam was the solution for, and the word that we use, the masakin, the poor, and that,
right.
and I think, and this is a point that you've made consistently, is that for the Islamic movement in any place in the world, the priority needs to be the uplifting of the masakin, and we learn
Hmm.
from the guidance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that those masakin, those poor people, ended up being the leaders of the ummah. And in fact, in some cases, there are people who came from with a silver spoon in their mouth from very affluent background, and then there were former slaves, and they came together as brothers, and they uplifted the whole ummah, the whole world. So I think based on your assessment, if we can just fix our ideology as a community, we already have everything else necessary to change the landscape. So
Yeah,
so that's what we
yeah,
got to do now, right?
yeah, yeah. I really, that's very well spoken. I think that there's a lot of criticism, and it could be legitimate criticism of folks who talk like I talk, particularly talking about making a distinction. And what the criticism I've heard so often is making a distinction between Islam and Islamic movement. But I've always understood from the time of my years in the Islamic Party that when we talk about Islamic movement, we're talking about identifying and Allah bringing to this big tent of Islam individuals who are committed Muslims, and and committed beyond their personal development and personal growth and personal finances and this kind of thing. People, it takes certain mentalities to make the sacrifices for other people. It takes a certain mentality, and you can look from the civil rights movement, Black freedom struggle. You can look in any country, in any area, but it takes a certain kind of longing uh, and perspective and everything else to sacrifice your what you're doing here in this world for other people. And it doesn't mean you got to be a pauper or you can't pursue careers or anything like that, but those things are secondary to the mission of establishing Allah's deen in our personal lives and the life of the society. And I think that criticism is something that over the years, it's not that I don't hear it and I don't take certain things to heart if I feel the criticisms are valid, but we are like, in my opinion, and I'll be quiet after this, but in my opinion, we are like sheep being driven by shepherds who only want to take us to a certain point. The expectation for these sheep is so low because of the wolves around and everything else, that you don't have a big expectation. And I think that oftentimes this is analogous to how we practice and understand Islam in this country today. It's like, what else can we do? And, you're talking about something ain't gonna never change and this kinds of things. And that has never been, the guiding principle for how we understand Islam and how we attempt to implement it in the society in which we live.
You know, this piece that you just this last little monologue that you just spoke,
Hmm.
it it validated your your comment before. It validated your comment about that ayah from the Quran being your mantra. Everything that you said was literally, I felt, a reflection of that ayah. So I think when you were talking about the commitment and
Right.
beyond self, beyond just yourself, and so I think, we're a little bit over time, so we can go ahead and
Okay.
close this out. But I wanted to
Sure.
close it out by sharing the ayah one more time. If you would like to, share the meaning of the ayah, then we can, or the translation of the ayah, then we can go ahead and close this out.
Yeah. We can just close it out.
Okay.
Inshallah.
Well
Yeah.
then, all right. Inshallah
And we
then.
can pick back up on some things.
All right. Sounds good. Next week, inshallah.
Okay. Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.